Shakespeare once said, "All's well that ends well." But what if only some's well and the rest are just mediocre? Today we're going to find the answer in this book, the Planescape Adventure Anthology, Well of Worlds, which features 9 disparate adventures set on the planes and named after the classic D&D magic item, Well of Many Worlds. Well met and welcome, my name is D and this is my channel D&D Ditches, where I focus mostly on Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition content. And today the D stands for Diamond in the Rough. I originally started this as part 2 of my Planescape Adventure Showcase series. If you missed it, part 1's right here. But after editing the footage, I realized I'm already at a 40-minute runtime, so I might as well release it as its own video. After all, if a job is worth doing, it's worth doing well. But I'll still settle for mediocre. I will be spoiling all the adventures in this book to some extent, so this is your warning. I'm going to give you my thoughts, what I've learned from my own experience, and what I would do differently to improve the adventures. So let's get started. We are going to take a look at Planescape Well of Worlds, which was released in September 1994, 5 months after the original Planescape campaign setting box set. This was the second adventure released for Planescape after the Eternal Boundary. This book is 128 pages long and contains 9 separate unrelated adventures presented as an anthology. These adventures can be run as one-shots, or you could incorporate them into your own campaign with a little bit of tweaking. So I'm going to give a criticism right off the bat. As this was written early in the Planescape product line, the quality of these adventures leaves a lot to be desired. At this point, the Planescape setting has only received the base campaign setting box set, plus the Planes of Chaos expansion, so a lot of the planes were still quite vague, and a lot of the DMs, the players, and even the writers themselves don't really have a clear idea what sort of adventures and what kind of stories this setting is capable of. Bear in mind that at this point, the setting creator, David Zebcook, has actually left TSR to pursue other things, and this book was written by Colin McComb as his first contribution towards the Planescape line. So it seemed like he was still trying to figure out what to do with Planescape at this point. Several of the adventures in this anthology breaks the law of Planescape. So for setting veterans, this is going to be an annoyance. However, if these adventures are presented to new players of Planescape as is, they could actually pick up the wrong ideas from some of these poorly written adventures. Let's have a flip through. The table of contents show that this book is broken into 9 separate chapters. Each consists of a separate adventure. There's a short introduction. We have a map of Avernus, which relates to the very first adventure, called To Baator and Back. This adventure is designed for 4 to 6 players of any level with a minimum total level of 4. So having run this adventure myself, I can tell you that this adventure is designed for a party of level 1 players. It's designed to be run as a one-shot adventure, and it's one way to bring the player characters from a prime material world to Planescape. So the adventure begins in a typical tavern. The players receive a quest to investigate a wizard's house, which is what this map shows. And through the investigation of this wizard's dwelling, the players trigger a mechanism which takes them to Avernus, the first layer of the 9 Hells of Baator. As this module was released in 1994, it would have actually made a much bigger impact back then than it does now. Thanks to Baldur's Gate 3, everybody and their grandmother thinks that they know about Avernus. So running the module these days, you're probably going to get a lot of, oh yeah, or you might get, that's not Avernus. Avernus is supposed to be like XYZ. While on Avernus, the players get to see a little bit of the sights and sounds of hell. The goal really is just for them to look for an exit and get out as quickly as possible. Back in the late 80s and early 90s, there were the concept of a Weekend in Hell module. I would say that this idea was made popular by Ravenloft. And for a long time, these Ravenloft or horror adjacent modules were marketed with this Weekend in Hell idea, meaning players get transported to some kind of nightmarish hellscape. And the goal is for the players to survive these trials and challenges that the DM throws at them and look for an exit to get out. And it wasn't until the Ravenloft setting box set came out, I think it was 1991, where they actually try to make Ravenloft a permanent thing, as in your players live in this hellscape rather than going for a visit and trying to get out as quickly as possible. So several of the modules in this book, including this adventure, were designed with this Weekend in Hell type of mindset. Here we have the Pillar of Skulls, which is one of the places that the players will get to visit in this venture. So having played this module, I will tell you, it is not good. It is incredibly railroady, and the shtick with this adventure really is that you're dropping a bunch of players in Hell while they're level 1. It's supposed to give them a bit of a scare because generally outer planes and hells are reserved for very high level play. And as Planescape was designed as a setting to be the planes being accessible at level 1, it's a proof of concept to the consumers by taking your party literally to hell at level 1 and saying, this is how you run an adventure, this is how you survive the outer planes, and does a terrible job at it. While they are in Avernus, technically anything and everything can kill them, but it essentially boils down to a haunted house ride, as in, if the players follow your prompt, and don't take any risks or do anything that's outside of what you're prompting them to, the hellish backdrop might as well be a green screen, because they will not actually interact with anything to any worthwhile extent. However, if your players wisen up to that and figure that out for themselves, they'll realize, oh, there's actually no danger in this. They're going to start feeling exacerbated or frustrated. They might start poking at the decoration. Which means, to keep this setting realistic, you need to deal out consequences. In which case, if they make one wrong move, they could very quickly die. Because honestly, Avernus is no joke. So if the players call the DM on their bluff, you've got two choices. Either make up some convoluted Deus Ex Machina thing that's going to keep the players safe, or you're going to have to come up with real consequences to preserve the believability of the planes, because you as the DM do not want the players walk away thinking the planes are just changing the picture on the green screen that's on the background. I would recommend that you don't run this adventure, especially nowadays, because Avernus is an old hat these days and even the novelty appeal of that is gone. I felt like after running this, my players didn't feel satisfied, and I certainly didn't feel satisfied. After going through the recorded footage, I feel like I need to elaborate on my experience a little bit more. So first of all, this is how the adventure is written. The party arrives on Avernus and immediately meets a Spinagon, aka Spine Devil, who provides a hint to go east across the River of Blood and seek a witch by the name of Hexla, who then directs the party south to the Pillar of Skulls to seek a way out of Avernus. After satisfying the Skull's request via one of several ways, we find out the location of the nearest portal in the southwest, and the portal key being a brick from the Great Avernus Road next to Bel's castle. During 2nd edition, Bel was the ruler of Avernus. Zariel was around, just not the ruler. The party is then encouraged to pick up a brick via the stealth option and ends with one additional surprise at the portal before concluding the adventure. As for my session, the players immediately initiated combat with a Spinagon and killed him. 5e players, you gotta love them. And now directionless, the players discuss strategy. I excused myself for 2 minutes to go use the bathroom, and when I came back, my ranger player was talking about pulling a con job on the devils, that he, a tiefling, will pretend to be one of the devils and pretend to chain up the rest of the party to allow them all safe passage. So I was of course screaming internally, knowing that the Baator would never consider a tiefling as one of them, let alone one that they've never met before, so this was not going to end well. The ranger player picked Fiend as his favorite enemy, and his backstory involved a deep hatred of the devils. And in 5e, rangers can do an intelligence check to recall knowledge or track their favorite enemy, so that's exactly what I asked him to do. He rolled well enough, and I told him that with his knowledge of the devils, he would have known that he would not be able to pass convincingly as one of them, to try and deter him from this seemingly suicidal plan. But to be honest, I've lied awake in bed many a nights thinking about what if. Prior to the session, I came up with half an idea on what to do if the players wanted to challenge the Baator instead of avoiding them. Obviously, they weren't going to be able to best an infinite amount of Baator on their home turf, but I had an idea that instead of killing them, that they would be captured and be conscripted to fight in the Blood War. They would be drafted onto a rickety boat sailing down the River Styx the very next day towards the Grey Waste. After being ushered onto the battlefield, they discover that they arrived a tad too late and the skirmish has ended, and the battlefield's littered with bodies. And the bodies would start to rise up, and the players would have to fight a horde of undead. And then they will be joined by a proxy of Kalimvor who tells the party to retreat and barricade themselves in a nearby village against the horde of undead. And there'll be some kind of quest about somebody's animating these corpses rather than let the dead be dead, so obviously the god of death isn't too happy about that, and the players would need to solve this quest before moving on. We ended up finishing the adventure more or less how the module dictated, but if I could go back in time and do it again, I would have let my players carry out their plan, get captured, and fail forward. So the moral of the story is, if you want to run this adventure, don't be too married to how it's written. Feel free to go off the beaten path, let them get captured, the adventure doesn't have to end. If your players don't take the setting seriously and they start doing stupid things, well, just deal out a TPK. After all, it's better that they learn that the planes are no joke early on. So before we move on to the next one, I just want to show you that there is a poster map included in this book, and it's attached to the back of the book. As you can see that my copy is still attached, so I'm not going to rip it off because I don't want to damage it, but I will put a copy of this image on screen for you, as it essentially depicts this map. It's drawn beautifully in the flourish of Planescape. And as I mentioned previously, in this adventure, you'll get to visit the Pillar of Skulls. There is also the River of Blood. Now let's move on to Chapter 2, which is called The Mazes. This adventure is designed for up to 6 players between levels 2 and 4. This adventure takes place almost entirely in Sigil, and is one of the few adventures in this book that I consider worth running. Before I go into the premise of this adventure, just going to give a little bit of background context. Sigil, the City of Doors, is ruled by an entity called the Lady of Pain. Anybody who's unfortunate enough to have a run-in with the Lady of Pain either gets flayed alive or they get mazed. So the Lady's mazes are an extra dimensional pocket that canonically exists in the ethereal plane, which is nigh impossible to escape. So all of the troublemakers that the Lady does not want to kill gets more or less imprisoned in one of her mazes. So the interior of the mazes look like the streets of Sigil, except the streets forever folds within itself. So it's almost impossible to find the exit. So the premise of this adventure is that the players are given a quest to retrieve the sword called the Lightbringer from the Lady's maze. And within the maze is an NPC called Vartas Timlin, who was an ex-factol for the faction called the Expansionist. Now, if you're familiar with the 15 factions of Sigil, you'll be asking, hey Ditch, I know all the factions of Sigil, and the Expansionist is not it. And you are right. The Expansionist was a faction in Sigil several hundred years ago, but clearly he did something to upset the Lady and he was mazed. So we have a map of the maze. It's presented a bit like a dungeon crawl. The players are racing against time to locate this NPC and find this sword because there are rival factions who are also doing the same thing. And this adventure is quite good because it gives you a lot of options on how to approach this. You can do it via diplomacy or deceit, stealth, or you can brute force it. And given that there are other factions doing the same thing, it opens up the role-playing potential of negotiating with or against certain factions. Your players could belong to a certain faction that has a vested interest in the artifact or the NPC. And there are just a lot of ways that you can really bring this adventure to life. I think the best way to use this is not to run it as a one-shot. Instead, once your characters have firmly established their backstories, their factions, their beliefs, and you're a few sessions in, this could be a quest that's given to them by a faction leader or a different NPC that has a different motive. For example, they could be trying to bring back the Expansionist faction. They could be an existing faction or another organization that wants the sword or the NPC for a certain purpose. That is when I would run this module. It would be even more interesting if the different player characters have different factions and they may have hidden motives. And as you're going to be encountering the other factions in this module itself, it opens up more roleplay opportunities and ways you can deal with the situation. My only complaint with this module, and this is very quintessential Planescape, is that there are certain things that's written into the lore of Planescape. For example, in this case, no one has ever escaped from the Lady's mazes. The fact that this guy and others like him has been trapped in the mazes for hundreds of years says how difficult it is to escape from the Lady's mazes, and yet the adventure just gives you an out like that. There is nothing more lore-breaking than the way that some of these adventures are written. So before I run this module, I would expand on the exit and not make it as simple. For example, like any good spy movie or spy operation, whoever that's planning a heist will always secure an exit strategy. Maybe prior to this module, the faction leader will get the players to do a string of seemingly unrelated events or things or favors, and at the start of adventure reveal that all of the things that the players have been doing were them gathering the resources for an experimental exit strategy that may or may not work. Because what is the point in sending in a heist team when you don't even know how they're going to get out? And make it so that the exit is not so easy and takes them to some random plane somewhere that's potentially dangerous. For example, one of the lower planes, they could appear in Pandemonium, which means that, hey, you just found the hook for the next adventure. I definitely think that this adventure is excellent as a centerpiece in a larger adventure of your own. If you build around it, it's going to be amazing. We move on to the next one, which is called Love Letter. This adventure is made for up to 6 players of any levels. It says any levels because it gives you the option of scaling the adventure up or down depending on the levels of your players. I would not recommend this adventure for a group of level 1s. I'm thinking level 3 is probably a sweet spot. That's what I would do, because they've got a few more options, unlikely to die in a single hit, and still low enough for this adventure to feel like a threat. So on my mate Gazza Mitchell's channel, he's actually done a video on this adventure because he's run it several times. I'm going to put the link to his video in this description. Go watch his video, show him some love, as he's got a bit more experience running this module than I have. So the gist of this adventure is that the players gets hired for a job to deliver a love letter. It's simple enough, right? Well, as it happens, the destination of this love letter is the Abyss. So the challenge now for the players will be to make it across the abyssal plane to the top of the keep and deliver this letter to a succubus. This adventure could be run as a one-shot, and it's another one of these weekend in hell type of modules, because you're there to do a job and get out. It is also designed to be quite railroady, but I guess a lot of these one-shots are like that. So I think if your players are aware of this, and they know that they're there to do a certain job, and not to stray from the objective, then this adventure could be okay. I do have another minor complaint about this adventure. I'm not going to spoil the identity of the quest giver, but he is essentially someone who should not be having a relationship with a succubus, as it goes against the Planescape law of the Tenaries to be associating with these other people. I'm being a bit vague, but you can probably read between the lines on what I'm talking about. If this is a player's first introduction to the Tenari, also known as demons, they might get the wrong idea about their entire race, which may set an incorrect precedent for this player going forward in future Planescape adventures. So the fourth adventure is called Blood Storm. This is designed for 3 to 8 players, 9th level or higher. So this is a high level adventure. Now we all know what the Blood War is, right? It's an eternal interplanar war between the Tenari demons versus Baator devils. This adventure deals with the Blood War in that you are hired by somebody to do some bodyguard work, and it takes place in a nameless prime material world. So it doesn't even take place on the planes. This is just some like anonymous, nameless homebrew world. When you get there, the players meet another NPC. She's offering the players to work for the opposition instead. So then what happens? The two sides meet, and no surprises at all, the two sides turn out to be the Baator and the Tenari. And they pick this out of the way prime material world to settle their differences, and depending on which side that you end up working with, you're going to be fighting the other side. As 9th level in 2nd edition is considered quite high, so it has a lot of combat. You're fighting the Tenari or the Baator or both, plus a healthy sprinkling of undead because it takes place in a cemetery. And then it's kind of a winner takes all scenario. So overall, I think this module is quite bland. I don't see good aligned characters really wanting to work with either fiend in the first place anyway. Even then, it's just an excuse for a lot of combat for no real purpose. This is a prime material world, so it's not even like either side can gain any ground. And it just doesn't really make sense that they want to do battle on a prime material world in the first place. And given that this is Planescape, you want to be on the plains. This kind of story can be told in Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk. There's not a lot of nuance to this adventure. There's not a lot of room for role playing. I think we can homebrew a better adventure than this. The next one is called Hard Time. It is for up to 6 players of any level, although low levels preferred. This is another module that annoys me because it gets the lore of Planescape quite wrong. So the premise of this story goes that the PCs are commissioned by a faction to seek a sage who just recently died from the prime material plane, which means that this sage named Zerakuk would now arrive on the outer planes as a petitioner. And being a dwarf, they anticipated that he would arrive in the Dwarven Mountains in the Outlands. So when the players get to the Dwarven Mountains, they found out that this sage never arrived, as there was a bit of a mix-up with the soul of Ne'er-do-well, and this nefarious character arrived in the Dwarven Mountains, and Zerakuk was sent to the prison plane Kasiri instead. So now the players will have to go to Kalothis, the first layer of Kasiri, to find this Dwarven petitioner Zerakuk and bring him back. They eventually meet a Titan. So in 1st edition, Kasiri was named Tartarus, and if you know your Greek mythology, you know that Tartarus is where Zeus exiled all the Titans, and this is where the Titan connection comes from. So in Planescape canon, almost all of the Titans live on Kasiri. So I think the adventure itself is okay, and Kasiri is one of those planes where very few adventures are written for. So I think that this adventure has some potential. The problem that I have is the inconsistency with the lore. Problem is that when the mortal dies and becomes a petitioner, they lose all the memories from their prior life. So even if this dwarf was a very prolific sage in his former life, he will lose all of that knowledge when he died. and almost everybody on the planes would know this already. So while the adventure itself is workable, the premise itself is flawed, because no one in a metropolitan planar city like Sigil would ever send someone on a wild goose chase that accomplishes nothing. Because if we go by Planescape canon, even if the players find the dwarf, they're going to find that he's lost all of his memory. Maybe you can actually work this flaw into the story, as in it's not a bug, it's a feature, I intended to do this. Maybe the quest giver is Effectol's assistant, who was a clueless a prime, and arrived in Sigil a few years ago, was able to rise up in the ranks of the faction, but didn't learn that when a mortal dies, the petitioner loses all of their memory. Maybe this could be a bit of a gag for the players, that once they've accomplished this mission, they realize all of that was for naught. And this could be a way for you to introduce new players to Planescape, the idea of petitionerhood and what happens when one dies. And I guess you could play it out for comedy, that they retrieved this petitioner and he was completely useless. Now they're going to have to go for plan B, trying to salvage this knowledge that the sage knew in his former life. And that's your next adventure. So chapter 6 is the adventure called Epona's Daughter. It is for 1 to 4 players between levels 9 and 11. This is another high level adventure. So just to give you a little bit of context on this adventure, on the Outlands, there are a species of creatures called Nic Epona. It's spelled Nic apostrophe Epona. I looked it up online. Apparently, Epona is the name of a real-life Caltech goddess of horses. And Nic Epona, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, means the daughter of Epona. And that makes sense because the adventure is literally called Epona's Daughter. So the Nic Epona are elder-planar horses that live on the Outlands. They're intelligent, they can speak, they can communicate, and they can also travel across planes. So the idea of this adventure is that the players are approached by this planar horse creature, Nic Epona, and she says that one of her sisters has lost her daughter, another one of these Nic Epona horses. And she asks the player to track her down and bring her back. So the players go on a search, and while they do, they find themselves in a loch, the Scottish name for a lake, and they encounter a king. He's found this horse and he says that he would like to keep her for whatever reason. And now it's up to the party to try to free this captured Nic Epona creature and bring her home. Once again, there's some lore inconsistencies because this region where the loch is with this kingdom supposedly is located on Prime Material Plane, but you were just on the plains moments ago. And this region is called Callanon, is modeled after Scotland. Even the king is called MacDonald. So you get to explore this entire region, including the King's Keep, which is a small castle on its own. There's a floor plan. So there are quite a few places to explore and quite a few things to do and quite a few NPCs to interact with. So the problem that I have with this adventure is that all the key NPCs are supposed to be lawful good, but they're acting completely and utterly lawful stupid. They have absolutely no nuance, like if someone was playing a paladin that was just single focused on one thing and that one thing only. Because I think that any reasonable person would not be acting the way that it's written. So probably okay to run this adventure as written. I would change these characters to lawful neutral or neutral instead of lawful good because it makes absolutely no sense. If you want to keep them as lawful good, you might need to do a little bit of homework and really come up with a background reason on why the king is acting the way that he is. Maybe there is a greater threat to his country, and hence there is another reason for him to kidnap this horse. So therefore it might open up another solution to his problem, where if the adventure comes to solve his other problem, he might be willing to relinquish the horse. Again, more food for thought. Keep in mind though that your PCs could be up to level 11, so they might feel like brute forcing the situation is going to be a valid way forward, which the writer probably thought is a valid option. Then we move on to chapter 7 called Recruiters. Now this is my absolute favorite adventure module in this book. It is for 2 to 6 players between 5th to 8th level. So unlike almost every other module in this book, where a lot of them are written like a railroad, this is actually more of a sandbox adventure. And this is why this is so good. The other reason is that this adventure could be a sequel to the first Planescape published module called The Eternal Boundary, as the main antagonist from that adventure actually makes an appearance in this adventure. However, as the way it's written, it does not capitalize on that potential. The way it's written, I would give this module a B. However, with a little bit of DM ingenuity, and a little bit of spit polish, you can make this an S+ adventure, the one that your players are going to be talking about for years to come. So I'm going to describe this adventure as written, and I'm going to tell you what I would do to capitalize on the potential of this adventure. So the adventure takes place in the gate town of Plaguemort, which is the gate town to the Abyss. And as we know from lore, the gate town is a place in the multiverse that closely matches the alignment of the neighboring outer plane. As the Abyss is aligned with chaotic evil, Plaguemort is very closely aligned to chaotic evil. So the players are given a quest to obtain a certain breed of Razorvine that only grows on the gate to the Abyss in Plaguemort. And this is the map to the gate town of Plaguemort. And you're given a list of different locations that you can visit. So while you're there, your PCs will have to wait and they get to explore the town with a list of things that could happen. And based on the actions of the party and the NPCs, Plaguemort could potentially slip into the Abyss. Or your players could do good deeds and prevent the gate town from slipping. And that's pretty much it. So like I said earlier, it's presented pretty much like a sandbox. You can do whatever that you want, but there's no real goal or objective apart from this super vague get this Razorvine thing. It's just an excuse for you to get to Plaguemort. It's structured narratively quite different to the other adventures in this book because all the other adventures have very clear objective to the point where you can actually see the rails, whereas this doesn't. So how I would run this adventure is firstly, run the Eternal Boundary in its entirety. In that adventure, the players discover the true villains behind the nefarious operations, which is an organization called the Illuminated, and they are based in Plaguemort. But the goal of the Illuminated wasn't really elaborated upon in that module or this one, so as a DM, give them a goal of what they're trying to do. And in the meantime, you can run certain adventures while the players are trying to uncover the goals of the Illuminated, which eventually brings them to Plaguemort. You have the entire town already written out for you, and you can use this module to base your adventure on. And because the Illuminated is active in Plaguemort, their plan could be as simple as make Plaguemort slip into the Abyss. Or their plan could be something else, and slipping into the Abyss is just a symptom of what they're doing. I think every single Planescape player should experience plane slip, or as what 5e calls a cosmic realignment, at least once in their D&D career. And what I like to do is make it so that the plane slip is a result of the player's actions, whether directly or indirectly. So in this case, you've actually got a lot to work with. You want to push this town towards chaos and evil, which is really easy to do. If you have players that are greedy or selfish, and they tend to lean towards things that are greed-based or what's in it for me, and this is really easy with modern 5e players, you could introduce NPCs or characters that offer them certain things. You know, make them like really charismatic, very nice, you know. Evil characters don't have to be murder hobos. They're the people who will do absolutely anything to get what they want, including trying to be like characters' best friends. You know, enticing them with deals, appealing to the player character's sense of greed and pride, and you know, think of the 7 deadly sins and think of other like motivations that are self-serving and like self-benefiting. As a matter of fact, in this module itself, it says that if the players choose to run away rather than trying to help the town, that their selfishness is what's going to cause Plaguemort to slip. Give them these temptations. Throw out the bait if you could. If the players take the bait, the next day they see the result of their action. For example, there is a greedy merchant that poses themselves like a friendly ally to the party, offers them information, offers them like magic items, gold, money, other things. Like, you know your players better than me, so you would know that kind of incentive that they would generally go for. Give them that. There's a general store from a normal family, and the merchant wants that piece of real estate because they want to do development or whatever. The merchant offers the players to go and convince this family to sell their real estate. And the players might actually do it through diplomacy and offer the family an above market average price to sell their property. And then they sign the contract, and the next day have the players witness that event. The merchant comes over and demolishes the house. And that event causes the plane slip. I like to really build it up, like you feel this stillness in the air. It must have only taken 3 seconds, but it feels like an eternity. You feel like if the time is almost standing still, and it's completely dead silent, and yet in your head it kind of feels like you're screaming. and it was the middle of the day. And then within the blink of an eye, literally as you blink and you close your eyes and you open them again, the sun is gone. The sky is completely black, and there are some fireballs that are raining from the sky in the distance. And as you realize, you are now in the abyss. That's going to give that holy shit moment, like, what have we done kind of thing. Now, some players might think that the DM's out there trying to trick the players into committing these things. So for the player's benefit, if you were throwing out all of these baits and they're not biting, like, you know, they're lawful good, they want to do the right thing, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Good job. I would make it so that the NPCs will do something, like there's some riot and commotion or something like that happens. That's what's going to cause the plane to slip. Once again, play up the plane slip, but then say to the players, you now have the chance to reverse that. The players know that they could actually undo what has just been done if they right the wrongs in that town. So they would have to go around doing good deeds. If you play Planescape Torment, there is a part of the game where the town cursed slips into Kasiri, and you need to go around doing good deeds to get the town to return back to the Outlands. So the same kind of idea here. You can create these scenarios. It could be a main quest, could be a side quest. So, you know, the Illuminator could be doing something that's really evil that causes Plaguemorph to slip, and give the players the opportunity to stamp out the evil, doing good things, you know, change people's minds, get them to do things that's out of like kind of their heart or out of like the common good for charity, that kind of things, and actually, you know, changing people's minds. It doesn't actually have to be through combat. Could be through role playing, could be through diplomacy, could be through like magic and other things. Once they finish the quest with the Illuminated and do a few side quests and good deeds, give them the reward of returning Plaguemorph back to the Outlands. And they are going to be feeling like heroes. So either way, whether the plane slip is a result of the player's actions, whether this is through greed, ignorance, carelessness, or your players were upstanding citizens and it's completely due to the villains who caused it, either way, the players have the opportunity to be heroes. So if they caused the plane slip themselves, they might feel bad, and you still give them an opportunity to undo their previous ignorant actions and let them redeem themselves. So either way, the player's going to walk away feeling like heroes. Unless they're murder hobos and they don't care about the people, in that case, well, Plaguemort is gone, and in its place, a new town on the Outland side will rise up to be the gate town to the Abyss. And you can run with that as well. Any way you slice it, this is a top tier adventure. Anytime there is potential for plane slip, capitalize on it. You are playing to Planescape's strength. And one more thing before we move on, I just want to show you guys something. So number 11 on the map is Sweet Larissa's Sausages. And on the map, number 11 is located over here. So they released this book called Dungeons & Dragons Heroes Feast Flavors of the Multiverse cookbook, which was released about 12 months ago. On page 167, is a recipe called chickpea and spicy sausage soup. And it says here, as served in Sigil, this soup incorporates Sweet Larissa's sausages imported from Plaguemort. So this recipe actually makes reference to Plaguemort that is within the canon. I have actually cooked this for my D&D group. You're using chorizo, so it's a little bit spicy, but it's quite nice. So if you want to make your session extra memorable, make this recipe. Read them this blurb and tell them that this is the actual food that their characters are consuming in Plaguemort. And if you want to be even more devious, later in the adventure, the players could find out that Sweet Larissa's sausages could be made from, for example, people or, you know, other things that's not so savory, to further add to the atmosphere and the immersion. It is Plaguemort after all. So now let's move on to chapter 8 called The Hunt. This is designed for 2 to 6 players up to 7th level. While Recruiters is the best module in this book, The Hunt is the worst module in this book. So the premise of this adventure goes, Factol, or one of the higher up faction members that one of your players belongs to, asks for a favor from his group. The players ask to be the chaperone of their son, who wants to go on an Altiplanar hunting trip. The son turns out to be a 17-year-old and has an attitude problem. It even says in the book who thinks it's beneath him to talk to the help. So if the party decides to take on this quest and take him out for a hunting trip to the Outlands, he finds a creature called the White Heart, which is a deer-like creature that's native to the Beastlands. The boy spots one of the deers, injures it, and just as he is about to kill this deer, your entire party gets transported to the Beastlands with what we don't know, again, one of these law-breaking things. While on the Beastlands, the boy and the party is hunted by anything and everything because the Beastlands is the plane of the wild animals. The boy starts running away, and it's at this point that the party is encouraged to also run away with the boy. That's pretty much the adventure. The entire chase sequence is handled in a form of, if we were playing 4th edition, we'd be calling it skill challenges. So it's written in a way where you just need to pass a number of dexterity checks. And then at the end of it all, the party sees that the boy has collapsed. And then the party's supposed to figure out how to get out of the Beastlands and take the boy with them. This is a map of the Beastlands. So this module commits pretty much every single cardinal sin there is. There's a railroading. None of your choices really matter. Unlikable NPCs. By default, the boy even belongs to the Fated. Does absolutely nothing to dispel the stereotype that the Fated are selfish pricks. They might as well change their name to the Hated at this point. Given that your party members are at level 7, which means that they have reasonable fighting prowess, they might actually decide that they want to fight these creatures instead. But the idea is that these creatures are endless. But the players don't necessarily know that. You might just end up with a really long, unenjoyable session for everybody, because by the time that they burn through their resources, you're several rounds into combat and you wasted X amount of time doing combat rounds that essentially don't matter. By the time that the players decide that they're going to run, they're already feeling miffed. And the entire chase sequence is played out as dexterity skill checks, which isn't particularly fun either. And then at the end of it, provided that your characters survive, you get reprimanded because you put this boy in danger, but then the boy is so unlikable that the party might just be like, well, leave him for dead. He's the one that did this to himself. Why should we implicate ourselves? So you're really putting the party in a no-win situation and no one's going to have fun. So don't run this, guys. It's a bit of a shame to say because there are so few adventures that take place in the Beastlands, but if you want a Beastlands adventure, run something wild instead. That one's much, much better. And we move on to the 9th and the final adventure, which is called People Under the Falls. This is designed for 4 to 6 players of 9th level or higher. I know I just said that there are very few adventures which take place in the Beastlands. This adventure happens to take place in the Beastlands, but it doesn't feel like the Beastlands. So what I mean is, you're actually traveling on the River Oceanus from Beastlands to Arborea. The premise of this adventure goes, you're hired on an escort mission to take a barge full of goods down the River Oceanus from Beastlands to Arborea. So it starts with a river journey. So at some point your characters come to an obstacle and they have to get off the boat. By this point it is late and there is a nearby inn that you're encouraged to stay at. As the party enters the inn, they find that everybody in the inn, including the guests and the hosts, have been murdered. They will follow this trail to an underground cavern, and that's when this adventure turns into a bit of a dungeon crawl. The party discovers that there is a portal which links the Beastlands to Limbo. And the Slarty have been infiltrating Beastlands, and they're the ones who's been slaughtering everybody. And then at this point, the party will need to decide what they want to do to solve this problem. The module itself doesn't actually tell you how to end this module, so it's reliant on DM fiat, how you want to conclude this. As this is a 9th level and above adventure, this module expects that your PCs have enough firepower and just throws enemies at you. This does not play like a Planescape module. If you remove everything about the Outer Planes and put this in Forgotten Realms, it would have played exactly the same. It's high in combat. I mean, look at this. In one room, they throw 17 green slard at you, and in another room, they throw 30 blue slard at you. And this is not even the final boss. So that gives you an idea what you're looking at. So I like the concept of this, and I definitely think that this could be an adventure that you can slot in a campaign, as even though this adventure takes place in the Beastlands, it can really take place on any plane where there is a river. This could be the Styx, This could be any of the prime material planes. So you can insert this scenario just to change the pace a little bit if you want to do something that's got a bit more dungeon crawling and a bit more combat. I don't know if I will use this many enemies though. But the thing is, you can actually tone this adventure down, and if you have, say, level 5 adventurers, and then they can go up against, say, 3 red slard, and the adventure still stays the same. So I don't think that this is a bad adventure, but I think that there's nothing really special about this, and it definitely doesn't feel Planescape. Before this book ends, it spends the last few pages giving you some new magical items, such as the Planar Mancatcher, which we will see again in later products because they are used by the Harmonium Patrol. The idea with this weapon is that once the target is caught, they cannot use their plane shift or any type of teleportation powers, and this is how the Harmonium makes sure their targets do not get away via magical means. And we have some new sickles and scythes. And that is the end of the book. So overall, a couple of standout adventures that you can dress it up and incorporate into an existing campaign, which could be made quite epic and quite memorable. And then we have some decent one-shots. And I think a few of these could even be run outside of Planescape, such as the Love Letter one, as it doesn't matter where you are when you first start the adventure, they'll teleport you to the destination anyway. And then there are a couple that you need to tweak the lore, because a Planescape veteran is going to say that doesn't make sense and could be an obstacle when it comes to coming up with solutions to the problems. Hey, thanks for watching. If you played or ran any of the adventures in this book, let me know down in the comments. Remember to like and subscribe, and hope we get to hang out again in my next video.